All right, welcome to this Java Fundamental Data Types coding tour. I'm Norman McIntyre. I think you'll enjoy this. So as an introduction, here you're going to write Java code that will make use of the Java Fundamental Data Types. As input, you're going to be given a string of data, and the data will be in CSV format, that is, comma-separated values. This is a very common format that you run into often when you're dealing with data. So the header of the CSV of the file will look like this. It'll have a first, which is where the first name is. It'll have a last. It'll have an ID. The ID will be a number. It'll have a class. The class will be either a freshman or a sophomore, and basically either an F or an S for that. There will be average. There will be a audit, and there will be accessed. So the average, of course, will be the average number, average score. Audit will be a true or a false, and then accessed is a time and a date. So when we look at each one of these, mapping this data into how we will represent it with fundamental data types, the first and last map very nicely into a string. So into this fundamental data type of a string. So example, John and Doe, first and last would be a string. On the other hand, the ID is going to be an integer. So by definition, we're saying the ID will always be an integer. For example, 1, 2, 3, and that'll be the int data type. The class, whether a freshman or sophomore, will be either an F or an S. And so the idea is this is a single character, either an F or an S. So that will be our char data type. The average, of course, will be a double. This would be the average of all the scores in the class. The audit will be whether someone's taking this course for a grade or whether they're auditing it. So that would be a Boolean, true or false. And then the accessed would be the time that they've accessed, basically the date and the time when they last accessed this information. So here's a sample string. I've got John Doe, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And notice at the end of that John Doe line is a \n. The \n is a line termination character. Now on Linux, it'll be \n. On another system, it may be something else. But we'll see how Java allows us to abstract what is the line termination character. In any case, the idea is you have a string with a line termination, and then you'd have another string, in this case Sally Smith, and Sally Smith would have their values, and then you would have a new line character on it. So basically each line is terminated by a new line. Now for this coding tour, we're going to do all the work inside the main.java. We'll not create any new classes. In fact, we'll see that in the following lesson that we cover next week. We'll actually look at this again, but do it by using classes. But here we won't. We'll, however, use the full advantage of methods in existing classes. So although we're not going to write any custom class to handle this data, we will be using the existing class. So as always, point your browser to https, the REPL.it, and start a new project. Here the Java Data Types Code Tour will be the name of this project. Of course, select, that'll be Java, and select create the REPL to create this project. You'll have your initial project, something you're now familiar with, where you have your file name on the left side, the main.java. You have your code in the middle, and on the right side, you have the console to see your output. So let's begin by adding S1 and S2 for students. So here we're going to add a private string S1 for John Doe, and we'll have an S2 for Sally Smith. And basically, we'll have this string data. Notice it's in comma-separated format. And to confirm that we have that, at line 11 and 12, we'll actually print out those values. And indeed, we see them appear on the console output. Next, we want to combine these individual students, each entry individually, into a single string, and we want to use this newline separator. That is how we want to separate using whatever the platform uses to separate lines. And so to abstract us from the details of what is the line separator, at line number 14, notice we do system.line_separator. So that way, if it's one separator type on Linux and another on Windows, that's okay, because we're just taking our string, S1 in this case, and concatenating the system.line_separator to put a line separator on the end of it. Then we concatenate our S2, and the same thing, we put the line separator on that. To confirm we've got that, notice at line 16, we print out this single string that has students. Of course, it has all our individual students, in this case just 2. And we see indeed when we print that out, we have a line of John Doe with a newline character, and then a line of Sally Smith with a newline or line separator character for that. Now at this point, we have our input string in the format that's required for this exercise. So time to map these fields into the Java fundamental data types. Looking at the top line, which is the header, first, last, ID, and so forth, and then also using in the middle the example, John Doe, 1, 2, 3, and so forth, we see what we'll really be reading is a string and a string for the first and last, an int for the ID, a char for the class, whether you're a freshman or a sophomore. The double will be the grade average. The Boolean will be if you're auditing or not. And the java.time.Instant will tell if when the last time you accessed this information. So with that in mind, we go ahead and declare, starting at line 19, we declare a string. This will be first. At 20, a string will be last. At 21, we have an int for ID. At 22, we have a char called class, CLS. Notice I abbreviate it because class is actually a reserved Java keyword, so we can't use that, so I use CLS. Line 23, we have double, we show the average. Line 24, Boolean, we show the audit. And then line 25 is our java.time.Instant. That'll be how we represent time when it was last accessed. Now our next task is we've got this input of multiple lines, and we want to split the multiple lines of this string into an array of strings. That is, when you think about this data coming in, here it's coming in as a string, but it could be coming in as a file, it could be coming in through the network as a block of network data. However it comes to us, we want to take that, and at line 27, notice since students is a string, it has a method called split. And so we split that string based on the system.line separator. So when the string comes in, we separate it based on the line separator, and that will give us the basically an array. Notice we have a string array of lines. And just to prove that we've done that, to prove we've got the proper number of lines, notice at line 28, system.out.println, we print out the lines.length. And of course, for this example we're doing, we have 2 lines, and in fact, notice we get the output total of 2 lines. Now we loop through all the lines, so to do that, we use a for loop. And at line 30, notice we say for line in lines. So basically, we go through this array, grabbing each line that's inside of there. And as our initial test, we just print it out. So at line 31, we just say, here's the line, and we just confirm that indeed we're getting each individual line. Now, when we've got an individual line, we really need to parse each value that's in between these commas. So we need to split each line based on this comma-separated value. So what we'll do is at line 32, we go to the line which we've got inside this for loop, and we do a split on it. But notice in this case, we're doing a split based on a comma, Why? Because these are comma-separated values. That split returns to us an array. So at line 32, notice we've got an array of values. So all of those have been split for us. And to confirm that, at line 33, we give a total of, and notice we go to the values, which is the array, dot length. And we know that an array, the dot length will tell you how many entries. And notice the output says we've got a total of 7 values. So now it's time to parse those values. And notice how some of them parse very easily. For example, 36, we know that values of 0, which is a string, but we know that first at 36 and also last at 37, those are both strings. So we literally just assign values of 0 and values of 1. On the other hand, line 38, the ID is an integer, so we go to the java.lang.integer and parse int. So we want to parse an int from a string. However, notice our string values of 2, we're careful to make sure it does not have any extra spaces, either at leading spaces or tailing spaces, so we use the trim. The trim makes sure that values of 2 is just that number, and it removes any spaces that are either preceded or follow that. So that's why we put the trim there. So at line 38, we've now got the integer ID. At line 39, we want to find a character. And notice we do the same technique. We know that values of 3 should be either an F if it's a freshman or a S if it's sophomore. However, that's a string, and to be careful, we trim it, get rid of all the spaces before or after, and then we do the char at 0. Because after all, this is just a single character. It's going to either be an F or an S, and so we pull that character in right there. At line 40, we do the java.lang.double.parse double. So we're calling on this method to parse double. As before, we make sure we trim everything before we look at that. And in a similar manner, on line 41, we parse Boolean. So notice we're taking advantage of the Boolean class, parsing on that values of 5, trimming it to get, in this case, whether you're auditing it or not. And at line 42, where it says accessed, the java.time.Instant.parse. So this also has a parse method. And as before, we take the values of 6, we trim it, make sure there's no spaces before or after, we give it to the parser, and that will give us the access time. Now to confirm that we parsed it correctly and we have the values we're expecting, at line 44, notice we do a system.out print line, and we take those values that we just parsed and we display them as our results. And you notice that the results indeed match what we had read from the file. So we've confirmed that we got what we were expecting from the file. So in summary, you've parsed a string into these Java fundamental data types. As always, make sure you have your code running and working as this is, and that way you'll be sure that you understand all the concepts. I'm Norman McIntyre. Thanks as always for watching.